Hello, everyone. Welcome to another lightning chat by Lightspeed Systems. I think this is our third episode that we're recording here of this series. And the first two you've heard from our product team. This time, you've got two of our go-to-market leaders. Myself, Colin McCabe, look after our international markets. I'm joined by my boss, Craig Chanoff. Craig, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me, Colin.
What we wanted to come together and record this episode around was about a time where we were physically together, doing a bit of a world tour, really, in what we dubbed our Lightspeed Spring Summit. It was an incredible series of events from my perspective. Fingers crossed, Craig thought so too. And we hit a number of different countries. We started in Scotland and London. We were in Sweden, Dubai, in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, all with the same kind of theme where we were bringing together different leaders in education, particularly in the technology space where so many of our products are directly aligned. And we were really giving a space for some conversations. Trends that we see in different parts of the world all coming together.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think, look, when I was a kid early on and I was a child of educators, I always learned that education was the biggest equalizer in the world. It was the silver bullet to a lot of the world's challenges. And I think education has always had this mission, prepare students for success in life, in the workplace, in the community, and in their personal lives. And I think we all know, the world around education has changed at such a rapid pace. It's having this very direct impact on how it fulfills the mission. What I think I was able to sort of experience as, we traveled the world together and got a lot of time together with all of these different education leaders in these different countries, was that this perfect storm of factors, whether it was these demographic or socioeconomic shifts, this need to support diverse learning styles, all the government policies on funding and accountability, the idea of consumerization, the parent expectations, all of those things were very consistent in regards to the challenges that people faced earlier or people faced together. And I think that was something that was really remarkable for me to experience and hear directly.
We can sometimes get really hyper-focused on that localization, but the event, when we were really talking to the leaders, cut to the chase for me, allowed us to really see things at that policy and that procedural and that structural and strategic level where things are really the same. I mean, you talk about the mission that we have, the mission of education itself. It's such a simple one. I mean, it has many different facets that break out from it, Craig, but at its core about advancing student learning is absolutely universal and will therefore have at least a body of universal challenges that flow from it.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that these aren't new issues. Everyone's been dealing with them somewhat at the same level. And whether it's access to high quality resources or issues with funding inequities, they're not new problems. People have been dealing with it for decades. I think the challenge that everyone is sort of facing today is that because of technology, the pressure that they are facing to address those challenges is very different today. And it's because the leaders within these schools and these organizations are dealing with the things that their predecessors haven't had to deal with before, which is how do you solve this problem with such a heavy reliance on the use of technology? If you think about even AI, right, and how that's going to revolutionize classrooms. It starts now with things like administrative tasks. How do you provide potentially some real-time feedback? How do you, personalize some of that learning experience? And AI is certainly going to be a great example of something that's going to reduce teacher workload and enhance the quality of education. But when we think about where that can go in the future on a global level, it's going to certainly go beyond curriculum planning. There's going to be things around targeted intelligent tutoring. There's going to be automated grading. There's going to be data analytics for real-time intervention. Future AI systems are going to be able to kind of recognize and respond to students' emotional states and then further personalize that experience. And when you think about leaders today within schools and how they're going to have to adopt and adapt to this technology, it is something that's very unique that leaders before them just haven't had to deal with.
Completely, and it's the exponential rate of change in that technology that's coming. I mean, it is true by the nature; it's exponential. So those challenges of introducing new technology 40 years ago, 50 years ago, whatever, we've seen an exponential need for that urgency, that speed of production. And I'll tell you a little quip from, my previous role working in the school local authority here in Scotland, where, I was beginning to introduce Chromebooks, and it was the parallel to when we introduced exercise books, and we asked them, people are talking about, well, how do I stop them from misusing the Chromebook? How do I stop them from doing X, Y, and Z with technology? And it was very disarming and a really thoughtful conversation pursued after we went, well, how do you stop them from doodling in the corner of a sheet of paper? Or how do you ensure that they're putting the pencil down to focus on the attention that we have? They're the same challenges, you say, but the all of the constructs that go around it, I feel, are just magnifying and going very quickly. It's interesting that your story there, Craig, went to AI. We didn't specifically per se focus so much of this event on AI. It wasn't like the headline. We didn't really have it so much in the agenda, but so much of the underlying conversations that I heard amongst the school leaders, particularly in our event in London, where I was privileged to sit in some really thought-provoking conversations were around AI. What I'm kind of seeing, I'm not sure if you're still seeing it in the States and in your conversations with our customers over there, is that we're seeing some really excellent examples of good practice, but it's here, it's there, it's dotted around rather than being the general consensus and that general benchmark for what we're seeing. And I'm excited to the future of education that's not very far away, where it is pretty ubiquitously used. That's a state I want us to get to in a very safe and measured way, of course.
Yeah, and I think, when you think about things like gamification, which I think develops incredible critical thinking and problem solving and collaboration skills, which are really essential for future careers. And then certainly when you think about the collaborative learning technologies, which are very interactive and, team-based learning experiences, those things are really going to shape how students learn and communicate and prepare for future skills and competencies that they're going to need to, be successful in life and in the community. And AI is going to play such a critical role, because how those things develop are going to really ensure that students not just have these skills that they can have so that they can collaborate and communicate well across, different types of people and organizations and things that they work with and they're exposed to, but they're also going to do it in the most efficient and effective way. And I think one of the fun things about watching how technology is evolving in the classroom, it's also going to lead to these experiential kind of learning experiences. One of the things that I did was I went to a classroom and they were using those virtual reality headsets, and they were having this incredibly engaging and memorable learning experience because the teacher was walking them through the loop. They were learning about art history, and they were going from classroom to classroom and, getting to experience the art in a very immersive way. And when I was talking to the teacher afterwards, she was telling me that a week ago they were at the Burj Khalifa, and they were inside and outside the building, and they were taking a tour, and they could really sort of, experience that in a very different way than certainly, I learned when I was, a student their age.
Completely. And it is the, the power and the excitement of seeing, a young person light up when they get to experience learning in that way. And it's so amazing that is what education is delivering. I guess, there's two things to jump off from there. My brain immediately actually goes to, well, it's a shame, but in the not too distant future, the young people will be thinking, another VR lesson, or they'll become used to that as the benchmark of technology. And you go, okay, but then what does education have to do? It just to reinvent itself. And we have to keep moving forward and moving that progression and moving the needle so that we always light that spark of curiosity.
There's a line that I learned once, or that I heard once, and it was that students today don't just accept technology, they expect it. And if they walk into a classroom and technology isn't being used, they're thinking something's wrong, right? It's like going onto a plane today and the Wi-Fi is down. It's like, well, what do you mean? Well, 10 years ago, that wouldn't have been necessary requirement when you were flying, but today it is. And I think when expectations change, that bar is set at a certain level. And certainly, students today who have been exposed to technology at such a young age and have, not necessarily a time in their life where they didn't have it, they have a different way in which they look at these things. Look, I think the one thing that we did learn from these experiences is not just that technology can really enhance the teaching and learning, experience for students and for teachers, and obviously there's just so much positive, but it really does expose a lot of risks for schools. And that was one thing that I took away from these summits, and realizing that this is not just, again, a US-centric issue or an issue that's central to the UK. I mean, cybersecurity in particular just seemed like it was such a threat to a lot of these schools. And it is the most, exposed industry in a lot of ways when it comes to, cyber attacks and ransomware attacks. There just isn't enough funding, for this issue. Schools are increasingly targeted because of the sensitivity of the data and the systems that they have in them. And the cybersecurity threat landscape is just changing so much. And I think IT leaders are going to constantly be tasked of finding ways to implement security measures without hindering educational process or limiting access to these really beneficial technologies. And so that's something that I think was, for me, like very eye-opening to hear how much people are feeling exposed there.
And that was something that came up on the previous lightning chat that Matthew Berg and John Genter were talking around, just that threat landscape being so broad. We heard it time and time again as we were in London. We heard it in Scotland loud and clear. We heard it in Dubai in particular as well. And I think your point is a really salient one that schools really struggle to grapple with. Yeah, funding, etc. Those are definitely all valid. But you get that idea that in a corporate environment, well, let's enforce 2FA, let's enforce all of these policies and make a really, strict landscape. But that experience for education needs to be different and needs to be more tailored. And that comes at a cost. It comes at a cost of, financial and just time to be able to actually set that up. And I think that's something where across the different potential difficulties with student safety that we discussed, it felt to me as if the one that we don't have a strongest answer for yet, or, there wasn't certainly a body of good practice that we can learn from really emerging yet outside of the individual things that schools are doing to pull that together. And that's a little bit of a worry for me.
It is. I think there are policies and, enforcing, activities that certainly schools can do. We certainly see, enforcement around things like cyberbullying, which I think is really critical. That requires policy, and it requires enforcement, and it requires a lot of education. And I think, unfortunately, you really do have to do all three very effectively in order to stop that from becoming an issue, that it can impact, the school and the mental health, of students, and ultimately the community's health as well. And we're starting to see policies come into place that I think are thoughtful and range. I mean, the mobile phone bans is like the easiest one, I think, to kind of pick on now, because we're starting to see this trend toward the idea of like, let's keep the phones locked away, let's keep them out of school. And there is no question that policy improves focus and engagement. It's going to allow students to interact in a peer-to-peer way, face-to-face, and hopefully create longer attention spans. And there are mental health benefits to that. It's going to reduce stress and anxiety when phones are banned. It probably will also naturally reduce cyberbullying, but there's going to be potential mislearning opportunities. Phones are educational tools, and banning them may limit certain types of interactive or technology-based learning activities that they really do need. And if you have really strict enforcement of these bans, it's going to create some tension between students and teachers. And so I just think for things like that, there is going to be a need to have probably a more nuanced approach and to find this balance between teaching responsible use of technology, integrating phones into learning when it's appropriate. And frankly, we need parents to play a very active role here of teaching good behaviors at home as well, which sometimes, doesn't feel like that's happening as well as it needs to.
Harking back to the start of our conversation, I mean, the role of the parent in education has always been a thing, but to the point you've just made, no more than ever, it is really exponentially increasing that is a very important third pillar that we see. And again, it's about, we had some of the grappling conversations that we had, particularly in the Middle East, where we know there's a much broader prevalence of BYOD, or bring your own device, where the students are bringing their own technology, maybe not a phone, maybe another device, but it's still parent owned, and bridging that gap about where the responsibility lies really comes down to some real strong partnership between the parents and the school. And getting that right is challenging.
It's a team sport, right? It requires participation and cooperation from all the different stakeholders. Like, administrations need to provide leadership, they have to set a vision, they've got to allocate budget, they have to create an environment where teachers feel like they can be developed professionally. You got to create policies that balance innovation with safety. The parents have to be good partners. They have to model healthy technical habits. The teachers have to integrate technology in a super meaningful way that really enhances the teaching and learning experience. They have to stay updated. And then students have to engage responsibly. And they've got to communicate openly about what they're experiencing online and the challenges that they're having, and where they're seeing the benefits and where they see opportunities to, frankly, goof off a little and, hopefully be able to try to limit that as much as possible. But that also leads into the conversation, which is like, where do the vendors play in all of this? Where do the partners like Lightspeed Systems and others? Because our job is to also develop safe and effective and user-friendly technologies. And we've got to provide data and insights to identify students that may need intervention or opportunities where improvements really need to be made. And so we all kind of play a role in this ecosystem. And I think that's the one thing that I feel like we've really kind of taken away, from these summits, is that everyone sort of has to play their part. There's no, one answer, to these questions. But I think for me, I walked away thinking, wow, we have like such a huge responsibility to support this ecosystem in a really responsible way.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's right. To a degree as well, it was definitely reflected in the attendees that they were really delighted that Lightspeed showed up, delighted that their colleagues showed up, delighted that they were able to get that learning. And we obviously, as you do at these sort of events, collected feedback. I'm not sure if we've shared that directly with you, Craig, for you to have a chance to see that, but I'm not saying it was overwhelmingly positive, but everyone who came, your parts were flawless, 5 out of 5, or 5 stars in all around, yeah. But generally speaking, it was, yes, the content was thought-provoking, and that led to the rich discussions amongst themselves. I sort of sit back and watched a couple of conversations where school leaders were they got the laptop out and they demoed. Well, one time they were demoing a Lightspeed tool to another person. So this was amazing for us to see how that will happen. In another example, it was another tool from a different vendor. And if we're trying to take our part responsible, or, the responsibility seriously, that was great to see that this was sharing of good practice that allows innovation and education to maintain. And, yes, it's happening in a forum that we were able to facilitate. So I feel pretty proud about that. I very much hope it's something we are going to continue. That's definitely the plan. And I'm not sure it's necessarily, going to drive any attendance by me be shouting this out, but you and I are getting back together in less than a month in July. It's a slightly different event, but it's not under the summit branding, but the purpose is definitely the same. We've built the agenda out, not shared this fully again with you, Craig, but here you go. You're getting an advanced look. We're looking at largely the same areas, and the idea of giving that platform in Singapore to some more of our Asian customers and the school leaders in that region is something, again, that we're really looking forward to continuing this dialogue, whether that's at in-person events or, again, my team looking after, the different markets we've got outside of the US. And Craig, I know all of the Lightspeeders who we've got looking after our US school districts are always delighted to help and to, facilitate these conversations in any way that we can.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And again, like the opportunity for us to, expand in the Asia Pac region and hear directly from them about the challenges that they're facing. I'm sure that we're going to hear a lot of similarities, and I'm sure there's going to be some nuanced differences to the different, countries in that region that are trying to also figure out a way to best support the teaching and learning needs of their teachers and their students.
Yeah, sure. And again, with your stellar 5 out of 5 performance that I'm sure you'll give in, I'm no doubt we'll be invited back to host another lightning chat to maybe do a bit of a summary on that. But for now, thank you very much for sticking with us, for watching or listening, and stay tuned for other lightning chats from Lightspeed Systems.